I'm Ashley Tyson. I'm with the Web3 Foundation. I want to thank Binance Labs so much for giving us this impromptu platform to talk about ideology, and whether or not Ethereum is a political movement. And I am super excited to be joined by actually the person who introduced me to Bitcoin a few number of years ago, Amir Taki and Vlad Zamfir. And I think that they both have a lot of great opinions and thoughts, and so I've been told that moderating is a skill, but I think my skill is really just going to be lending these two gentlemen the platform to speak. And a bit of structure. Well, we know how that goes with you and me, Amir. So I actually want to kick it off right now because, Amir, you kind of had a reaction just now when Arthur asked the previous panel about technologies that maybe aren't getting enough love in this space, and enterprise adoption was mentioned. So I'd like you to maybe elaborate a little bit more on that reaction.
So, for example, when
speaking back, you're both on and we have a problem. Turn on.
Hello? There's a bit of echo, anyway. I really don't think these new emergent technologies offer anything for Westerners, for people who are already served by this financial system. The real use of this technology will be for people who are suffering, people who are in war, people who have a real need to take these technological concepts and apply it to their society. Just to borrow an example, when Marx came along and he proposed some new ideas about how to organize economy and so on, it wasn't the Westerners who applied his ideas, it was people who came from developing countries who learned those ideas and brought them back to their own country to organize revolutions, to change the social system that they lived inside of. So as much as possible, this technology have really big potential to shape society, but it's not going to come from this society where there is an already well-established financial system, and we should ensure and protect this technology as much as possible to avoid capture by large regulatory and state-based powers. And there is a role for corporations and businesses in this space that are interfacing with the legal system to put up as a resistance as much as possible. But the technology really has a transformative potential, and there's only a window of opportunity. I don't want to be overly optimistic that the technology is going to give us, has a destiny of giving us unbounded human freedom. It is something that we have to work for, we have to organize towards. It's not a given. There is a window of opportunity, but only if we're prepared to seize that, if we're well organized and prepared to make best use of that.
I'd like to toss it over to Vlad because Amir mentions government capture, and I'm sure you have like a whole diatribe that you want to go through right now, but recently at Web3 Summit you talked about government capture, and I feel like that might be a great thing for you to elaborate on a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I super agree with Amir that we need to try to avoid capture of the blockchain governance by state entities or corporate entities, basically because it undermines the utility of the blockchain for any governance application. Because if you want to use the blockchain for some application, then it's going to be subject to blockchain governance. And so if you have some like international governance app, it's going to be subject to the corporate governance. It's so loud, I don't know what you mean. It's going to be subject to corporate governance or state governance, and therefore, won't be like as new of a kind of international institution as we, think that blockchains can be, right? Like blockchains are an international institution that isn't born from the legal tradition, but which exists across many different jurisdictions and is very much born as a reaction against the legal tradition. And so we have like this kind of cypherpunk crypto-anarchist technology that's like international global thing that maybe can serve as a platform for governance of commons that isn't captured by corporations. But I think we get very, very easily screwed up.
So maybe that leads a little bit into this governance risks that you've been talking a little bit about. Can you maybe talk about what the potential downfalls are and kind of what that future could look like?
Well, I mean, there's lots of ways to get captured. The easiest one is to ask for it, either by laying out the red carpet or by, making terrible noises, which like make it so that people have to come and shut you up. So there's you don't want to like attract governance from the outside, and you don't want to lay out the carpet to welcome it. And I think people are very, very ready to do both in this space today. They're very, very ready to propose governance processes that are very easy to capture, and they're very, very ready to commit as hard as they credibly can to do things that are politically very unpopular, to the point where they're willing to say things like, it doesn't matter the social costs, we're never going to fork the blockchain. So I think people on all sides are asking for it. They're asking to be governed by saying all sorts of sociopathic shit that people won't accept. And by laying out the red carpet and just saying, here, this is how to do it. These are the steps, do A, B, and C, and then blockchain governance is yours. I think those are the two risks that stand up to me, but just because they're so everyday for me, in the blockchain space. People threatening crazy shit, making themselves target, making everyone a target for governance, and also people just welcoming external governance.
Do you have specific examples?
Oh, sure I do. I mean, in case you didn't notice, I was thinking about on-chain governance and the plutocracy crowd. You know who you are. Definity, Tezos, Polkadot, Cosmos. There's more, but maybe less credible than those four. So these are the red carpet people. They're just welcoming capture. They're just here it is. Here's our blockchain nervous system that you can use to control the blockchain. Here's the rules that determine how to own and execute any order on the blockchain. They just institutionalize owners. So that's one side, the red carpet side. And then there's the Bitcoiners and Ethereum Classic on the other side, total sociopaths. They don't give a fuck what happens on the blockchain. They're willing to let anything happen on there, and they won't ever interfere with that shit. Every day, man.
Amir, I'm curious your thoughts.
Right now, geopolitically, we're heading into a very new part of the human history, where it's what Immanuel Wallerstein called bifurcation point, when you have a chaotic system and initial paths, they go forwards and they follow a very similar trajectory, and then they reach this kind of tipping point where they verge off into radically different directions. And the worldview that we as Westerners use to understand and comprehend the world is no longer effective in dealing with the challenges that we're facing as a humanity. And in some ways the rise in religious extremism, movements like ISIS, rise of nationalist movements, Hindu nationalists in India, these right-wing governments that are coming into power, like Trump or Bolsonaro in Brazil, who just got elected, are an indication or a signal of a kind of future that we're heading into. And it's not a hippie, happy future that we all kind of maybe feel that it's going to be. It's, in fact, maybe a future where there will be a lot of human suffering. But it's also a moment of opportunity. For example, now countries like Sri Lanka, which has just experienced a constitutional crisis, year on year, these countries are liquidating all of their country's assets to pay off the global debt to the IMF. The head of the IMF, Christine Lagarde, recently made a talk called Fight Fire with Fire. She said that cryptocurrency poses one of the biggest threats to the financial order, and that governments need to create their own cryptocurrency systems to challenge the rising threat that these cryptocurrencies face by enabling money laundering and funding of terrorist movements. That is code speech. Money laundering is what? Money laundering is counter-economic activity outside of the state. Terrorist financing is what? It is financing of non-state sanctioned movements. Against this system, this breakup of power, the only weapon that the states have is to increase the authoritarian and the mechanisms of control at their disposal. And that is exactly what they're going to do. And the biggest basis of Western civilization is materialism. And in particular, the financial system and the system of accounting based off of money. In fact, people work their entire lives. Some people work 10 years, 20 years in jobs that they know is completely meaningless, that has no purpose whatsoever to earn a piece of paper printed by a central bank. It is one of the most sinister forms of mass human conscription or slavery in human history. And what we have to do, what that means as a cryptocurrency community is we have no shortage of techniques or ideas at our disposal. But the problem is that we have this idea of self-autonomy and self-governance and decentralization, and they are very powerful ideas. But self-governance does not mean nobody can tell me what to do. You know, I can go wherever I want, and so on. Freedom is a bigger concept. Freedom is a sense of aspiration towards something higher, reaching your full potential as a human being. And you know, like the way that we are effective as a civilization, as a human society, is by having different roles and functionalities that enable us to collaborate and work together. And as a cryptocurrency community, that is extremely lacking right now. The market is enormously fragmented into all of these different sub-projects and micro-fiefdoms in which people are just climbing up a ladder to kind of be the kingmakers of Bitcoin or any of these projects. It kind of feels like people are making a lot of projects which are just meant to attract or distract people's attention momentarily to be like the next new big thing, without going and thinking maybe there are smaller tasks that we can devote ourselves to working on, which maybe isn't so glamorous or attention grabbing. But there's all these projects, and there's all this finance and capital going to a lot of projects that don't make sense, and a lot of it feels like influence buying. Groups buying influence in other groups and building like social cliques. So what we have to do as a community is we have to try and develop a coherent idea of what is it exactly that we're striving towards, and we have to analyze inside of our communities what is our capability, and then what is the problem space of projects that we want to solve, so that we can start to organize to actually coherently attack all of that problem space. Because it's not just about being the leader of this one small project, about being one of the main developers of Bitcoin. Our goal is much higher than that. We're facing really large, entrenched financial, social, political interests. It's a huge goal, and it's going to require a massive level of human social coordination. But the good news is that in this community, I see a massive amount of really idealistic young people who are skilled and have access to huge amounts of capital. Some of them have more money than God. That's a real opportunity. If we can kind of direct that force, it can have a massive impact. Socio-political impact is a really big opportunity. But we have to be able to organize something coherently to make use of that.
But Amir, So what do you think we can rally around as the cryptocurrency community?
Well, this is part of a lot of what you discussed around governance and methods of organization too. So I'll also throw that back to you, Vlad, and see if you have any proposals for it.
Yeah,
well, if people want to understand about the society we live in and where it's all gone wrong, I encourage them just to look up on Wikipedia the article about civilization, the origin of human civilization. But in terms of technology, I want to posit that there are two modes of technological development. The technology has a very mixed legacy of being shaped by two very different mentalities. One mentality is the mentality of hierarchical, socially stratified, centrally state-based civilization. And, for example, one of the examples of that is the pyramids in ancient Egypt. Everybody uses the pyramids as a great example of some amazing monuments, but these were giant pieces of rocks built for a ruler or a pharaoh off of the lives and backs of hundreds of thousands of human beings, huge amount of human suffering, and for what? A gigantic piece of rock in the desert. And but opposing that, there are technologies such as, for example, Unix philosophy, which is building one modular piece of software that does one thing well and can be combined by other people to build even larger systems. Like, for example, in a software project, you have these monolithic software projects where there is a head architect who designs all the parts and everybody has to kind of be managed by an organization. But if we really want to give people power over this advanced technology, we have to think about how can we pull out these advanced concepts from the minds of brilliant thinkers into the hands of people, and that means it means, for example, documentation. It means good APIs, but it also means building modular software. It means code that is written with beauty in mind, as a craft that people can comprehend and read, and that other people can take that technology and they can use it to build all different kinds of technological systems. It can be that not only a small group of really highly technically inclined programmers can have access to this technology, but many other people are able to make use of this technology to build other types of technological systems that are imagining, maybe things that we couldn't imagine. And that means, and also there is a difference between an African and an Indian and somebody in Latin America. The contexts are completely different. The market is completely different. The types of solutions that they will need are completely different. We have to take that into account, and that's why modular technology that can be reconfigured, that can take advantage of those geopolitical differences, is something that we should be focusing on, because right now a lot of the technologies that have been developed is made by a guy in Silicon Valley who thinks, okay, I need to spread Bitcoin to more people, and it's purely numerical, and okay, what kind of people? Somebody like myself who lives in Silicon Valley, but I honestly believe that the real opportunity for cryptocurrency is not the mass market, but it's the long end of the tail. It's markets where are not being served by the financial system. I have another thesis that there is actually a huge black market economy that is not currently being catered for by cryptocurrency community. And the first peoples to take advantage of that are going to be extremely wealthy and successful.
So what's your agenda here, Amir? What are you trying to encourage people to do?
Well, it's simply that I believe human freedom is something that's extremely important. The current system that we've constructed brings us great material benefits. Like I live inside of a civilization. If I live in the forest, and I clothe myself, I feed myself, I keep myself warm, there is no state involved in that. I'm a free, autonomous human being. But I don't live in the forest. I live in a civilization with other people. You know that guy who works in the factory that makes that mobile phone? That guy doing a mechanical work all day like a robot? He's lost a part of his humanity. He's not fulfilling himself as a human being. Now, I'm not saying that we can totally decentralize all types of telecommunications infrastructure and industry and so on, but we can think about how we reconfigure the forms that exist inside of society to maybe democratize them, or to give more personal empowerment over the system that people live in. You know, it can serve humanity rather than enslaving us into a hierarchical, mechanical super apparatus, the mega machine. You know, and technology is the weapon that we can wield to force that process.
I mean, you know, I hear you, but like, isn't it like unpredictable how who the technology is going to benefit and how that's going to like influence political realities? I mean, not everyone's going to have equal access to technology. Not everyone is going to be on the winning side of the use tech to screw your political opponent's game every time. It's, you know, can't it be too much freedom?
I just mentioned a name called Ted Kaczynski. I don't know how many people know this guy. So Ted Kaczynski, he realized that he cannot run away to the forest. He has to confront this thing. And he did what he thought he could do to make people aware about that. We have two choices. Either technology fundamentally leads to human enslavement, you know, and subjection. For example, recently, and people can look this up, it's called EATR. EATR. There was an outcry over a new system that the US military is developing called ITER. Now, I don't know how many of you have seen the big dog robots made by Boston Dynamics that can walk long distances over all different kinds of terrain, mountains. Now, the military says, you know, we're developing this apparatus because, you know, it's to give supplies to the soldiers. But many people suspect that it will be used to carry heavy weaponry. It will be a mobile killing platform, basically, carrying machine guns and so on. So this subsystem the American military was developing was a way for robots to eat and digest biomass, that they can get more energy when they're out in the wild to go over long distances. The reason people had an outcry is people were saying, well, if you're developing killer robots that kill human beings, they will be able to eat human beings and to use that energy to power themselves over longer distances. But like, why are we developing that technology? You know, I heard of a new technology recently that is being developed in China, which is glasses that can do facial recognition of people. You know, like when you come off the train, a policeman stops every other person, checks his documents. Now they can check people's faces automatically. They can just scan it in a database. Within 6 seconds, they can grab somebody. You know, they're in Dubai, they're developing mobile platforms in the sky. The police can literally just come down and apprehend a suspect from anywhere in the city. You know, like the social rating systems, in which, you know, if your rating drops too low, you might not be able to rent an apartment, you might not be able to get travel. You know, that's the blockchain. Yeah, it's exactly right. The blockchain is really useful for that. Like I've even seen a project for analytics and tracking of people's debt records through blockchain. Those things already exist. So that's the real danger. And you know, I could say, okay, well, technology is inherently evil, and in that case, you know, what is there for me to do? Nothing. You know, there's only. I don't think technology can be destroyed. It's too embedded. It's in fact something core to what makes up humanity. There is a glimpse of a hope. You know, all throughout history, there are mythologies, there are stories. For example, the story of Kawa, who when there was an oppressive ruler, an Assyrian ruler over the society, he taught his people how to make iron tools to be able to resist and overthrow their ruler. Technology has played a role both in enslaving and liberating people throughout human history. And it's our job as a community, as a vibrant community, with a lot of fresh ideas. A lot of these corporations, they don't generate new ideas, they can only capture ideas and use it to make profit. Is our role to organise and develop an analysis of economics, of politics, of law, of self-defense, of society, of culture, and to think how can we apply that technology to really help move towards the kind of system that we want to see.
So Vlad, I know you also think a lot about.
So let me to summarize. Too much freedom could be good or bad. It depends, and it's up to us. I'm satisfied. I mean, that's cool. As long as there's that slimmer of hope for us to hold on to. I mean, no, I'm actually, guardedly optimistic that we're going to be, that like blockchain technology on net won't lead into a terrible dystopia.
How can you be so sure?
I'm not, but I actually don't really think that like I think at the end of the day, blockchain is going to be like, to some extent, like, basically, let me put it this way. I think like the relationship between like blockchain and society will at the end of the day be a reasonable one, even though people in the blockchain space might not like that. Or either because it means that it's like completely captured, or because it means that their like immutability wet dream isn't a reality.
Do we think that immutability is the wet dream?
Yeah, I think it's just like completely insane to imagine that you can absolve yourself of responsibility over like a server because you decentralized it and declared that you're going to have a social norm that it's immutable. I mean, I think it's just, I don't think it's ever going to stand like, any kind of social scrutiny. This idea that like we can not have the kind of responsibilities that we have when we run centralized technology, when we use decentralized technology. So I think like, the idea that like you can immutably run a server while someone's using it to like attack innocent people, I mean, people don't really, like pretty much every centralized software service has a reported use functionality because people don't accept that. And I don't think that the blockchain will be any different. And so I think like, the immutability stuff isn't really going to happen. And then the question is like, to what extent does the blockchain get captured? And in some way that's all very normal. Like we're all used to being owned. It would just be more of the same dealing with like, kind of like hierarchical system where some other kind of group of participants in governance, for most people, get to decide governance outcomes that affect them, right?
So speaking of hierarchical power systems, Amir, I'd like for you to talk a little bit more about that. At the Web3 Summit, you had talked a bit about how kind of we can't step away into this like magical utopia. So what do you think these like new power structures and dynamics will look like with decentralization being an actual usable technology for?
Well, there's different forms of power. For example, there's economic power, there's ethical power, and we have to think like, what is the role of all of these things that we create? And I'd say my answer would be to foster the ideal type of human being, and in terms of the technologies that we can create, we really need to kind of. Right now, what I see is there is a lot of abstract thinking about all these technological systems. People like drawing diagrams and so on. And there's very little kind of actual interaction with like the world of culture and society and so on. The thing is engineering have a very specific kind of mindset. To be a good engineer, you have to be able to optimize towards a certain goal. Even science itself, science is about like stripping away all the complex reality to understand mechanisms at the root of it, so that we can exploit those mechanisms. That's what we do as a technologist. We think, how do we build technological systems that go forwards? Unfortunately, that thinking, when applied to human beings, can be very destructive. When you reduce a human being down to a mechanical object, that's almost like, like they say that inside of this period of modernity in the last 100 years, has been the greatest period in history with the largest amount of genocide, of ethnic cleansing. It's like the era of a dehumanizing mindset. So we have to actually think about not just technology, how do we build more technology, but also, and it's also not just, for example, me going, okay, what is going to be the technology we develop, and then communicating to you, okay guys, this is the plan, these are the projects we need to do. It's also a really important role is fostering the mindset of the technologists themselves, so that every person is able to be a carrier of those ideas and able to implement them themselves. And in the medieval period, they conceptualized the society in this three different kinds of people, which was, you have the peasant who was doing the agriculture, and he was the center of all of society. You had the knight, who was the warrior, who was the protector of the realm, who wielded the weapon, and you had the priest, who was the source of values, morals in the society. And in terms of technology, we can kind of maybe conceptualize a similar model, which is that we have our community of users, the people that we make the technology for. If we're just developing technology for ourselves and we're not applying it to the society, then it's simply a useless utopia. We have the developers, the engineers, the people who wield this weapon of technology that they can use to shape the material reality around them. And we have the entrepreneurs, the people with the visionaries, the people with ideas, who try to think about where are there opportunities in the market? Where can we apply these techniques to create some kind of change? And in terms of the hacker, I think a hacker is an embodiment of all three of these things together. The hacker apply the technology in the society, the hacker birth and invent new technology, and the hacker is also the thinker, the intellectual, the person who tried to think about how can I use the technology for shaping the world. Timothy C. May himself said that he believes it's ideological types who will create interesting new things.
Sweet. I feel super ideological all the time. I'm like, I have a lot of reactions to pragmatism, and I deal with a lot of pragmatists all the time. But I think there's like, not much that I have to say. Sorry, I don't know.
I'd like to toss it to Amir again, but Vlad, feel free to chip in. But Amir spent a bit of time in Rojava. You were deeply involved in some of the core development in the early days of Bitcoin, and then you felt called to go to Rojava, I guess, to participate in this kind of anarchist revolution that was happening there. And you've come back a democratic confederalist, somebody who is kind of exploring Ethereum and other technologies. You've been a critic of Bitcoin, but also an equal critic of Ethereum and other blockchain projects as well, but I think with the intent to kind of improve all of these ecosystems. So it would be super cool if you could talk a little bit more about your time in Rojava and how you think this technology can be used in a practical way in places like that.
So my father is from the Middle East. My father is Iranian. And, I never understood the Middle East until I was there those 2 years. And I finally understood, being there, what the Middle East is about. The Middle East is a a really interesting place. It's a place where humanity, the birthplace of human civilization, it's the origin of the world's major religions and philosophies. And many times throughout history we've seen this, it maybe it's something to do with geography, or the intersection of, you know, the Indo-Europeans and the Semites and the Turks. The Middle East always is kind of like an incubator for new philosophies of life that end up spreading to the West. And the Kurdish movement is a movement that has developed a really compelling body of ideas that when I went there, I really thought that I would be bringing them knowledge about anarchism or about my philosophy there. But when I was there, what I encountered was people who had been shaped by decades of struggle, really philosophical, charismatic individuals, and a philosophy of modern society that I found extremely compelling, that spoke to me on a deeper level. And through my time there, I first started in the YPG, in the military, and I left after some months where I was organising foreigners who were coming there to participate in the struggle. And after some time of managing the foreigners, I went to work in civil society and doing economics work, working on energy projects and agricultural projects to do with, and where they're building factories and industry. And it is during that time there, I kind of fully understood what exactly does it mean to change society. What is the process of the development of a new system in a society? You know, like the need for economics and industry and systems of law, but how, you know, like the kinds of problems you face in building a new society, in dealing with the old mindset of people who lived under a dictatorship before, trying to construct a new system, the way of organizing people. For example, the PKK, which is a revolutionary force fighting against Turkey, has about 50,000 people living in the mountains of southeast Turkey. And, you know, fighting the second biggest army in NATO, you have to be an extremely well-organized, coherent political force. So a huge amount of organization that it takes to do that. And what I learned as well is the process of how, the methodology of how we organize as revolutionary groups of people to be effective in dealing with politics in the society around us. In observing the process of establishing a new kind of start-up government, the kinds of problems that you're dealing with in constructing a new society. And because of my work in economics as well, I gained the trust of a lot of the very influential people there who now have a very big interest in cryptocurrency and blockchain technology. And they've been training now programmers in also cryptography as well. And they were asking me the other day, you know, like what texts are there about the philosophy of crypto-anarchism, of this hacker movement, of blockchain and so on. And you know what, I couldn't think of anything that exists right now. It's right now it's just informal ideas between people and on random blog posts. And it's not just about this movement of people that want to kind of comprehend these ideas so they can apply it to their context. But you know, even in this community as well, I see a lot of disaffected people who you know, they kind of maybe feel that they're outside of the process. And if there was a way that we could kind of establish some kind of structures that people who want to kind of develop themselves as hackers, that they can have a curriculum, and there's also projects that people can participate in, you know, that's also the process of decentralization as well. Decentralization is not people doing things spontaneously by themselves. In fact, what emerges out of that kind of spontaneous organization is an invisible form of hierarchy. It's exactly the same thing that happened in the Occupy movement, where, and there's a famous quote from someone who said, you know what's worse than an orderly which is dominating us, a new invisible elite, that we cannot see and there's no way for us to challenge. And that's the real danger. There's always going to be people who are more charismatic, who have more money or have more power than other people. Remember, there's different forms of power, and the role of the structure is to establish mechanisms for people to be able to challenge the power of those individuals. And there's a healthy balance between charisma and organisation. Charisma is kind of like a heart of what gets us there. It's how we organise as people. We're inspired by ideas, and we try to devote ourselves to meaningful things. And we try to develop those ideas, and we develop plans from those. At the same time, organisation is necessary because we exist inside of this society. And if it's charismatic individuals who just come to dominate an organisation, individuals with ideas, then there's no kind of oversight, there's no check on the balance of that power. So we have to understand how do both of these two opposed systems work together effectively, because in some levels as well, we live in a system of organisation, and we want to construct a new paradigm, a new societal paradigm. And the anarchist movement for the last 50, 100 years, whatever, has been opening coffee shops and bicycle repair shops and squat cinemas. And where has it got us? Nowhere. Maybe it's time to try a new, different way of doing things. And that's why I'm telling to people that they should look at the ideas of Abdullah Öcalan, which he has a series of books called Manifesto for a Democratic Civilization, because this is the writings not of some random guy, but the ideas of a guerrilla movement in the Middle East that has been fighting against the Turkish state, against ISIS, and really has been trying to understand why is the Middle East so fucked up. And the conclusion Öcalan came to is that this concept of the Western nation state doesn't fit the mentality of people in the Middle East. People in the Middle East have loyalty to their tribe, to their religion, to their culture, to their family. And what modernity has done is create these artificial nation states that cut across entire ethnic groups. And it's not even. You don't even have one group of people living here. You have a patchwork of different groups, and the only way that these nation states can maintain their power is through authoritarianism and elimination of difference. And it's something that happened in the West a very long time ago that is kind of been erased from our memory. I think in France, 100 years ago, 40% of France used to speak a language called Occitan. That language does not exist anymore. It was eliminated by the French state because it was a threat to the unity of the French nation state. It's incredible.
Matt, how do you think that technology can be used in Rojava?
I don't know. I don't know. But I am curious if I could, ask Amir a question. Okay. What do you think we should do in the blockchain space as a first step to not end up, screwing up our governance, getting captured, or not having balance of power, getting captured by a charismatic leader, or any of these other potential pitfalls?
Yeah, it's really good. I think the most important thing is to establish academies that work to transform the mindset of people, rather than trying to think about what particular mechanism that we put in place. In ancient Greece, Socrates, they used to have the concept of the gymnasium, where young people used to come and do sports, but it wasn't just a it wasn't just training them to compete in a competition. It was also it was to develop them as human beings. They also got instruction in mathematics, in religion. When Socrates came and proposed a new system for Greece, they had him executed, and his student Plato founded the academy. In Plato's academy, many great thinkers and intellectuals of the ancient world were trained. For example, Cicero was trained in Plato's academy. After Plato, Aristotle founded the Lyceum. When the Christians came along, they shut down all the academies in Greece, and all of the teachers went east to Baghdad. And it was those teachers going east and founding academies in Baghdad which started the Islamic Golden Age. So I really think that the academy is the real revolutionary form as a place where, in the modern schooling and university system, is a degenerate form of the ancient academy. The academy is a place where people come and they study and they learn and they work on projects and they live together as well. People who want to devote themselves to a project. And right now I see I hear from a lot of people who want to develop themselves as programmers, as hackers, who want to contribute something meaningful, but they're all kind of drifting around from project to project. There's not really like a space where they can go and they can be part of like an organization that's really dedicated to this kind of activity. I think that is the most meaningful thing. I just want to mention about Richard Stallman as well, that Richard Stallman saw what was happening to the technology world, that all of his idealism was being eaten up by all of these large corporations and capital that was flowing into this previously idealistic community of hackers. And he came along to everybody and he said, look, it doesn't need to be this way. We can build our own free software operating system. And he released the GNU Manifesto. And if you read that manifesto, it says, this is the software that we made, this is the software that we're making, and this is the software we're going to make, and this is how it's all going to fit together. And when I was 16, I read the writings of Richard Stallman and of other hackers, and I decided that I wanted to be a hacker. I wanted to devote myself to realizing this grand vision that was put in place by Richard Stallman.
Wow. Tell us more.
We have 20 minutes, Amir. The stage is yours.
Okay, I want to ask Vlad a question. If there was no limit on the gas price in Ethereum, what applications could we make? And if you solve the Oracle problem, then also what could we make?
That's a terrifying question. I'm actually super duper concerned about Ethereum with zero gas price, because I don't think that I don't think we have the understanding of our relationship with Ethereum that like would be required to like unleash that kind of power. Especially with oracles. If there's no oracles, okay, it's actually much more limited because all you can do is like stuff that can be verified with smart contracts. But if you have oracles, then all of a sudden you have like real life information and real life actions that can maybe be at least incentivized, and if not, like, you know, more actively triggered. So definitely like oracles make the blockchain scarier, but you have to realize that the oracles are off-chain, and all of these kind of like smart contract triggered actors are off-chain. So even if Ethereum is amazing, you really need to have also like amazing oracles to have like a whole system that can like, you know, build all these kinds of like apps that we kind of imagine. But the reason why I'm like, you know, not as excited about the prospect is because like I wonder, when you ask me these things, like I think about all the terrible things that I'm afraid that people will build, as opposed to like the things that I'm like excited about. And I think that's just because like I'm super concerned about the state of governance today. But if governance was better, and supposing that you're asking me to imagine nice things that people could build, then I would love to answer the question. I mean, so the number one thing that I was super motivated to do when I got into Ethereum, and that I would still love to see, is to have like decentralized peer review and curation in kind of, you know, as like an alternative to the academic peer review that is like normally captured by, you know, various venues. So that's like one of my favorite ones, is like one of my pet ones, but I'm also really a big fan of the idea that like anyone can deploy an application and not have to run servers, that the role of developer and the role of maintainer could be completely separated. The idea that like, you know, people will have access to cheap information security, you know, for everyone, you know, and like, you know, including publishing and authentication, not just privacy. I mean, these things are like, you know, the kinds of things that we dream of. And like we imagine that it'll be like empowering, but you know, I really think that like we really have a lot of governance stuff to face, because like I don't think that we're all well intentioned. You know who you are. You know, I think there's a lot of people in cryptocurrency actually who are planning on doing stuff that I would consider outright malicious with blockchain. And I think that like, you know, these are the main people who make me terrified of zero gas price Ethereum. You know, I don't want to give specific examples, but you can let your imagination run wild, I think.
We have about 15 minutes left, and there's an extra chair up here because we wanted to do a little experiment. There's so many brilliant minds in the room. We want to welcome you know, people to come up and join us and ask questions of Vlad and Amir. So if you have any questions, come up here, join us, drop a comment, participate in the conversation. Come up. Just come up.
So I simply have a question, well, I'm Ome, and I would like to ask, why do we want to decentralize it? And see how far we go.
Well, I mean, in my opinion, decentralization is like a means to an end, and that end is actually not being captured. And I think actually that's actually the main thing that I see decentralization for, is like basically to make it difficult for the systems that we build to get captured by adversaries of various stripes. You know, decentralization it provides a kind of security against adversaries.
So what is an adversary?
Well, you may have all sorts of different kinds of adversaries. It depends on who you are and your setting. But for the most part, it's someone who wants to like shut you down and stop you from doing what you're going to do.
So who are you and what do you want?
I wish I knew. Not really.
So then how can you be sure that what you're building is going to bring something that you want into this world?
I'm not, and I'm not. I mean, I wish I was, but I mean, I don't know that. I mean, I don't think we can predict all of the consequences of our actions even close. And I don't even have that much of an idea of what I want.
So you're saying that maybe we can predict the future?
I'm saying I can't.
So should we try? Should we acknowledge that we cannot predict the future?
Well, I mean, you know what we should do, in my opinion, we should be really paranoid and think about all of the worst case outcomes and try to prevent them.
That you can imagine?
Yes, yes.
And that's not biased?
Well, I mean, I'm not saying it's, you know, you're magically going to be able to think of everything.
So it sounded, I'm Laraz. It sounded to me like you were proposing, when you're using the word governance, sort of like a government for blockchain that decides what should and should not be possible using this technology, and who gets to decide that? Like if you don't want an assassination market, let's take really bad examples, right? You don't want an assassination market, but how do you have a system that has immutability and sufficient decentralization to avoid capture and not allow an assassination market to develop if enough people want to support that application?
It's the problem of our times, man. It's the problem of our times.
Look, I can tell you, I can list for you a bunch of applications that I thought up before, and I decided not to make. And honestly, I wondered to myself, why have these applications not already been made? They're not complex, they're relatively easy to make. And my conclusion is first of all, no one actually came up with these ideas. And secondly, even if they did come up with these ideas, they simply didn't think it was a good use of their energy as developers. You know, there's a certain mindset in technology that what will get made, what can be made, will inevitably get made. And I don't think that's really the case. I think we kind of, as a community or as a group of developers, we kind of devote ourselves in a direction. And that direction is driven by ideologies or kind of other forces.
But it wouldn't be enough to just develop an assassination market. You would also have support for it by its users. There would need to be an active marketplace. So even if an evil developer decided, oh, I'm going to set that up, it wouldn't work if society didn't support it, or at least a sufficient part of society.
Assassination markets have been set up multiple times. They never gained traction. I'm not saying they won't be set up in the future. I'm just saying, you know, for the technology of assassination markets to develop, for them to develop more elaborate countermeasures from being shut down by states, from evading surveillance by police and so on. You know, there need to be an active force of energy of developers who are driven to stop that happening. And you know, I think that's why I'm talking about training hackers and shaping the mentality of people, because I think there's a constant war going on. In evolutionary biology, they talk about the Red Queen hypothesis, which is evolutionary life forms are constantly in a race against each other. The predator is developing more elaborate measures to be able to hunt the prey, and the prey is developing more elaborate measures to defend or protect itself from the predator. So we never stay still, we're constantly evolving. The myth, the illusion of, you know, Bitcoin as a static system with 21 million coins and blocks every 10 minutes, there's so much more to the technology beyond just that core 10,000 lines of code. You know, there's the protocol underlying it. Like, do we put encryption in the network itself? You know, like, how do we develop the applications? What area of applications do we develop? Where do we put our research energy? You know, people think science itself is like kind of like neutral and objective, but I actually question that. I think science is heavily led by ideology in society. Like we decide as a humanity where the research money goes, what the areas of science that develop. So it's exactly the same thing with technology. So my idea is you know, we need to actually start developing the mindset of hackers themselves, so they know where to put their energy, you know, like to increase human freedom. And they develop a more richer conception of the world around them. They can make an analytical, they can more better analyze the society to be able to have power over transforming the reality around them.
I just had a question. So we stopped talking about the assassination markets because it's boring. Devcon 6. Give us some titles of the Devcon 6 and some parties you want to see, or how many people, whatever. Just project into the future.
Sorry, wait a second. You want us to project the quality of Devcon 6?
Yeah. Quality, people, whatever.
I mean, you know, if we have a bear market for 3 years, like, you know, I'm hoping, it's gonna be awesome. You know, it's gonna be cool. All the moon boys will have left. It'll be a real cool place. Knock on wood.
conferences. There's like a real need to improve the format of the conferences. It always feel like we're going from conference to conference to conference. People are like meeting with each other, and everybody demonstrates their project. Oh, this is what I worked on, and so on. But I would actually think it would be maybe more productive if we actually had some maybe like courses inside of the conferences. Also, if we had kind of meetings with the community, where people were able to have discussions on certain issues, where responsible individuals inside of the community were questioned by other people in the wider community, and also explain why they make decisions in certain ways, and that the events that we create doesn't just feel like random social get-togethers and networking, but actually feel like momentous like events where things were decided, where new projects were born, new collaborations. I'll just give one example, which is this like last year when I was in England. Every year they have an anonymous protest, and I know the guy who organises the anonymous protest in England. They spent 1 year to organise this protest, and it starts at the Parliament, and it goes all the way to Trafalgar Square, and tens of thousands of people from all around England, young people, come to this protest, and it goes all the way along, and then that's it, nothing. They just go home until next year when they have the next protest. Like instead of having people come to the end, there's some speeches, people are inspired, given some new ideas, or like there's leaflets handed out. This is for the next 1 year. This is what we're going to work on. These are the projects that we're going to make.
We have time for one last question. No pressure here.
What do you want?
You didn't answer my question.
Which question?
Why do we want to decentralize? Why are we in this?
Okay, yeah, Ramir, why do you want to decentralize stuff?
Decentralization is a technique. It's not an end in itself, but it's an effective technique to stop attack by an adversary. I don't think decentralization is always, it can be sometimes counterproductive, but it's also a very powerful technique as well.
So like Ashley said, no pressure.
I'll actually ask this question to the three of you, so including you. Vlad, at the beginning of this talk, you mentioned that there's like two approaches you see around governance. There's like the red carpet, the like no governance.
Two easy ways to fail.
Exactly. And arguably Ethereum sort of falls in the middle right now, where there is some governance process. It's not formal. It's not formally specified in any way. So I'd like you to talk about like the trade-off between having that where it's not easy to capture, but it's also very illegible for outsiders. So you risk having basically only insiders like core devs and people who are very familiar or who have designed this process being able to actually use it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a common misunderstanding that just because something's formalized, it means it's easy to capture. Because we look at voting all the time, because voting is such an example of like where it's both formal and easy to capture. And so usually people associate formal governance with governance that's easy to capture, because people usually associate formal governance with voting. But there are all sorts of formal governance processes that aren't voting and aren't as easy to capture. Like, for example, if you look at the IETF and the way they do like internet governance, right? They don't use voting and they haven't been captured in the same way that, for example, the W3C has. And I think that's because of the, I don't think it's because they're opaque about the process. I think it's because they have a formal process that's hard to capture. And I think that's absolutely possible. I think you have a process that everyone understands, and that's out in the clear, and it's hard to capture at the same time. Like, I don't believe that formal and capturable are synonymous at all.
Yeah, I'm gonna let Amir close this one off, but I think we're seeing a lot of work in this area right now, and certainly, you know, we don't have a lot of the answers. I think Vlad is like, I kind of side in his kind of train of thought here, but I think like the Ethereum Magicians is doing a lot of good work here, and I just think that we need to kind of question the status quo and maybe not fall into kind of like the same hierarchical structures that, you know, have kind of led us here in the first place. But Amir, do you want to close this one off?
The government is a collection of individuals which are responsible for administrative functions of society. And that means the day-to-day managing of finances, the allocation of resources, and so on. But it also means the setting of long-term strategy. And the type of governance that we create inside of our organizations should be a reflection of the type of government that we want to see in the wider general society. And we talk about, first of all, in terms of government, I think, overly large bureaucracies can be detrimental to the creative thrust of society. We should seek to limit bureaucracy as much as possible. Sometimes process, especially when there's a very big conflict of interest, is important, but also we should also recognize that public participation in political life foster in people the ability, first of all, consciousness, but also the ability to construct a general will amongst themselves and to achieve compromise. So, as much as the type of structure of government that we create is important, also the actual act of engaging in politics also shape the character of people. And that's kind of what we're seeing in the society today, where people are disenfranchised from politics. Maybe we officially live under a democracy, but actually, in actual fact, we probably have less power to affect reality than we did in ancient times. And that's why it breeds a general level of apathy and nihilism in the society. So the ideal type of structure that we create in a society should allow all different forms of human social organization to coexist together. And that means that different organizations that are solving different problems in the blockchain space will want to have different forms of social organization. For example, hierarchical social organization is very effective at responding quickly to a rapidly changing environment where there are problems arising, but over long term it can be detrimental to creative thought. And whereas kind of more open, free environments encourage and nurture development of thought. And we have like we have a very large problem space that we're dealing with. So the kind of model that I think that we should favour is a kind of dual power structure where organisations are governed on the type of structure that they deem fit for the context that they exist in, obviously with some form of consciousness, and we can work to educate people about what is the ideal structure for their context. And each of those organisations should have a delegate which is sent to a kind of umbrella organisation where that delegate is kind of like a popular assembly where all of these different organisations can find common points of interest for collaboration, so we can kind of be more effective as a wider community rather than a bunch of individual projects all doing work in parallel and inefficient. I just mentioned about Linux. The problem with Linux is, we had dozens of Linux distributions, all pretty much similar to each other. We had lots of different desktops. We had dozens of text editing applications, calculator apps, but we didn't have one decent Linux desktop. We didn't have one decent video editor because there was no strategy in the free software movement. And that's something that we really have to understand is important in this decentralized community. And it doesn't mean that there needs to be some power that's kind of forcing people. You know, the whole point is to try and convince people through the power of our argument and through the force of incentives. And when I talk about a democratic assembly that bring different groups together, it doesn't mean like a mass of individuals. It means finding all of the different interest groups in the community, those interest groups organizing amongst themselves autonomously, and we can teach those groups how to organize, and then those groups having delegates being sent to the other organizations to be able to coordinate amongst themselves.
And we'll leave it at that. Thank you, Amir. Thank you, Vlad. Thank you.